May 1940. Hermann Göring stood before Adolf Hitler in a command post near Dunkirk and made a promise that would define his legacy. The Reichsmarschall, chest heavy with medals from the Great War, assured his Führer that the Luftwaffe alone could annihilate the British expeditionary force trapped on the beaches. The army could halt its advance. The Air Force would finish the job. Hitler, trusting the judgment of his most decorated commander, agreed. Within days, over 338,000 Allied troops had escaped across the Channel, snatched from certain destruction by a flotilla of civilian vessels, while German bombers failed to stop them. Göring's promise had proven hollow, but he would make another, far grander promise. And this time, he assured Hitler, the Luftwaffe would not fail. Hermann Wilhelm Göring had every reason for confidence. At 47 years old, he stood as the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, a position earned through both military credentials and political cunning. In the Great War, he had shot down 22 enemy aircraft, commanded the legendary Jagdgeschwader 1 after Manfred von Richthofen's death, and worn the Pour le Mérite at his throat. He was not some desk-bound theorist making promises about air power. He had fought in the sky when aircraft were still fabric and wood, when every kill demanded skill and courage. Now, he commanded the most modern air force in the world, a force that had swept aside the Polish Air Force in days and had supported the Wehrmacht's stunning conquest of France in just 6 weeks. The Luftwaffe had proven itself in Spain, in Poland, in Scandinavia, in the Low Countries, in France. Every campaign had ended in victory. Every promise Göring made about air superiority had been fulfilled. Until Dunkirk, but Göring chose to see that failure as an aberration, a result of poor weather and the unexpected resilience of the Royal Navy, not a fundamental limitation of air power itself, certainly not a warning about what would come. By July 1940, Hitler faced a problem he had not anticipated. Britain refused to surrender. France had fallen. Poland was crushed. Most of Europe lay under German control. Yet across the Channel, Winston Churchill's government rejected every peace overture and prepared to fight on. Hitler had no desire to invade Britain, he would later claim. He wanted to turn east, toward the Soviet Union, toward the Lebensraum he had always envisioned. But Britain's continued resistance threatened his entire strategic position. He could not leave an undefeated enemy at his back. On July 16th, he issued Führer Directive No. 16, outlining plans for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. The directive contained a critical prerequisite. The German Air Force must overpower the Royal Air Force so completely that the invasion fleet would face no meaningful air opposition. Everything depended on Göring's Luftwaffe. Göring welcomed the challenge. He had been stung by the criticism following Dunkirk. His reputation as Hitler's most reliable commander suddenly questioned. Here was his chance to prove himself again, to deliver the victory that would force Britain to terms and secure his position as the Reich's indispensable man. In meetings with Hitler throughout July, he made his case with characteristic bombast. The Luftwaffe possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. The RAF was already weakened from the fighting in France. British aircraft production could not match German output. The British people, he assured Hitler, would crumble under sustained bombing. He had studied the reports from Spain, where German aircraft had bombed Guernica and other cities. He understood the psychological power of air attack. 4 days, he told Hitler. Give him 4 days of good weather, and he would destroy RAF Fighter Command in southern England. 4 weeks, and the entire RAF would cease to exist as a fighting force. The English Channel would become a German lake, and the invasion could proceed without air opposition. Hitler, despite his reservations about a cross-channel invasion, believed him. Göring had the credentials. He had the force. And he had the confidence that came from an unbroken string of victories. On August 1st, Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 17. The German Air Force is to overpower the English Air Force with all the forces at its command in the shortest time possible. The order was clear. The timeline was aggressive, and Göring's reputation hung on the outcome. The Luftwaffe that prepared to destroy Britain was a formidable weapon. Göring could deploy roughly 2,600 aircraft across 3 air fleets. Luftflotte, 2 under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Luftflotte 3 under Field Marshal Hugo Sperler, and Luftflotte 5 in Norway under General Hans-Jürgen Stumpf. The force included approximately 900 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters, the most advanced single-seat fighter in the world at that moment, capable of speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour. 300 Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighters provided long-range escort capability. Over 1,000 bombers, mostly Heinkel, He-111s, Dornier Do-17s, and Junkers Ju-88s, could deliver tons of explosives to British targets. Supporting them were Stuka dive bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, and coastal units. The numbers were impressive. The crews were experienced, blooded in combat across Europe. The aircraft were modern, well-maintained, and ready. Against this armada, RAF Fighter Command could field approximately 640 operational fighters at the battle's start. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding commanded a force that appeared outnumbered, outgunned, and facing certain defeat. But Dowding understood something Göring did not. This battle would not be fought on German terms. The RAF had advantages that did not appear in order of battle statistics. They possessed a sophisticated radar network along the coast, providing early warning of incoming raids. They fought over their own territory, meaning damaged aircraft could return to base, and pilots who bailed out could return to combat. They had shorter supply lines and could concentrate forces at threatened points. And they had one additional factor that Göring consistently underestimated. They were fighting for survival. The Luftwaffe fought for conquest. The RAF fought for existence. The desperation was different. Göring set August 13th as Adlertag, Eagle Day, the beginning of intensive operations to destroy the RAF. He gathered his commanders and laid out the plan with confidence bordering on arrogance. The Luftwaffe would attack RAF airfields, destroy fighters on the ground and in the air, bomb aircraft factories, and eliminate Britain's ability to resist. The operation would proceed in phases, each designed to draw out and destroy RAF fighters, until none remained. Then the bombers could range freely over British cities, breaking civilian morale and forcing Churchill's government to sue for peace. Göring predicted the southern RAF groups would be eliminated in 4 days, total victory in 4 weeks. His commanders, veterans of the campaigns in Poland and France, saw no reason to doubt him. They had never failed before. August 13th arrived with poor weather. Göring postponed major operations, but some units did not receive the cancellation order in time. Scattered raids proceeded in confusion. The Luftwaffe lost 45 aircraft. The RAF lost 13. It was not the auspicious beginning Göring had promised, but he dismissed it as weather-related bad luck. The real battle would begin when conditions improved. Over the following 2 weeks, the Luftwaffe threw itself against RAF Fighter Command with increasing intensity. Massive formations crossed the Channel, sometimes over 1,000 aircraft in a single day. Messerschmitt 109s tangled with Hurricanes and Spitfires over Kent and Sussex. Bombers struck at airfields, attempting to destroy fighters on the ground and crater runways. The fighting was brutal. RAF pilots flew 4, 5, sometimes 6 sorties per day, climbing into bullet-riddled aircraft, engaging superior numbers, and landing just long enough to refuel and rearm before scrambling again. The strain was enormous. Pilots fell asleep at mess tables. Some were too exhausted to eat. The loss rate among fighter pilots exceeded the training pipeline's ability to replace them. By late August, Fighter Command was bleeding. But so was the Luftwaffe. The losses mounted faster than Göring had predicted. British fighters proved more resilient than expected. The radar network meant RAF fighters could be vectored to intercept, rather than flying standing patrols that wasted fuel and pilot energy. The Spitfire matched the Messerschmitt, 109 in performance, and the Hurricane, though slower, was a stable gun platform that could tear bombers apart. Luftwaffe bomber crews, accustomed to fighter escorts staying close, found that the Messerschmitt 109s had limited range and could only spend minutes over England before fuel concerns forced them home. Bombers caught without escorts died quickly. By the end of August, the Luftwaffe had lost over 600 aircraft. The RAF had lost 430 fighters, but many pilots had survived. The exchange rate was not what Göring had promised. Göring grew frustrated. His intelligence staff assured him the RAF was on its last legs, down to its final squadrons, unable to sustain the fight much longer. Each day, they reported the destruction of dozens of British fighters. Each day, they predicted imminent collapse. Yet each day, British fighters rose to meet the raids. Where were these aircraft coming from? The intelligence was wrong, systematically and catastrophically wrong. British aircraft production under Lord Beaverbrook's Ministry of Aircraft Production was actually exceeding German output. In July, British factories produced 496 fighters. In August, 476. In September, 467. The Germans produced less than 400 fighters per month during the same period. The British were replacing losses faster than the Germans could inflict them. But Göring's staff did not know this, or chose not to believe it. On September 7th, Göring made a fateful decision. The attacks on RAF airfields were succeeding, he believed, but too slowly. Intelligence suggested the RAF was down to its last reserves. One more push, one dramatic escalation, would break British resistance. He ordered a change in strategy. The Luftwaffe would shift from attacking airfields to bombing London. The reasoning was partly strategic. London was a major port and industrial centre, and partly psychological. Göring believed sustained bombing of the capital would break civilian morale, force the government to divert fighters to defend the city, and bring the remaining RAF fighters into a decisive battle where superior German numbers would annihilate them. Hitler approved the plan eagerly. The RAF had bombed Berlin several times in late August, humiliating Göring, who had once boasted that no enemy aircraft would ever reach the capital. He had declared enemy aircraft had reached Berlin. Now London would pay. On the afternoon of September 7th, over 300 bombers, escorted by 600 fighters, struck London's docks and East End. The attack lasted hours. Fires raged across the city. Over 400 civilians died. The bombers returned that night, and the next day, and the next. The London Blitz had begun. Göring believed this was the final phase, the knockout blow that would force Britain to surrender. But he had made a critical error. By shifting away from RAF airfields, he gave fighter command time to recover. Damaged airfields were repaired. New pilots arrived from training units. Aircraft production continued. The pressure that had brought the RAF to the breaking point in late August suddenly lifted. Dowding's force, given breathing space, stabilized. September 15th, 1940. The day dawned clear over southern England. Perfect flying weather. Göring ordered a maximum effort, every available bomber and fighter to strike London in overwhelming force. This would be the decisive blow, the attack that would finally break the RAF and prove his promises to Hitler. At mid-morning, radar stations detected massive formations building over France. 250 bombers with 700 fighters formed up and headed for London. RAF controllers scrambled every available squadron. Over 200 fighters rose to meet them. The battle that followed became legend. RAF fighters tore into the bomber formations over Kent. Hurricanes attacked the bombers, while Spitfires engaged the escorts. The fighting spread across the sky from the coast to London. Bombers dropped their loads haphazardly and turned for home. Fighters wheeled and dove and climbed in desperate combat. The Luftwaffe crews, expecting little opposition, found themselves facing fierce resistance. In the afternoon, a second wave came, and again the RAF met them in force. By day's end, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft. The RAF lost 26 fighters, but most pilots survived. More importantly, the RAF had demonstrated it was far from defeated. The force Göring had promised to destroy in 4 days, now 2 months into the battle, remained unbroken. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Without air superiority, the invasion could not proceed. The Luftwaffe had failed to deliver what Göring had promised. The RAF had not been destroyed. Britain remained defiant. The first major defeat of German arms in the war was complete. Göring's promises to Hitler had proven empty. His 4 days had become 2 months. His predicted annihilation of the RAF had become a grinding stalemate that Germany lost. His assurance that the Luftwaffe could accomplish what the Army and Navy could not had been exposed as hubris. The reasons for failure were many. German intelligence consistently underestimated British strength and overestimated German effectiveness. The Messerschmitt 109's limited range meant bombers were vulnerable for much of their mission. The Luftwaffe had no 4-engine heavy bombers capable of carrying truly devastating payloads. German aircraft production could not match British output. The radar network gave the RAF advantages that negated German numerical superiority. And fundamentally, Göring had misunderstood the nature of air power. Aircraft alone could not force a nation to surrender, particularly when that nation had the means to defend itself and the will to endure. But perhaps the deepest reason was Göring himself. His vanity had led him to make promises he could not keep. His need for Hitler's approval had caused him to overestimate his force's capabilities. His morphine addiction, his obsession with art collecting and luxury, his distance from operational realities, all contributed to a commander who believed his own propaganda. He had been a great fighter pilot in the Great War, but that did not make him a great strategist in 1940. He understood individual combat, but not the complexities of a sustained strategic air campaign. He made promises based on what he wanted to be true, not what was actually possible. The Battle of Britain officially ended on October 31st, 1940. The Luftwaffe had lost approximately 1,800 aircraft. The RAF had lost over 1,000 fighters, but the RAF survived. Britain survived. The invasion never came. Hitler turned his attention eastward, toward the Soviet Union, leaving Britain undefeated at his back. It would prove a fatal strategic error, enabled by Göring's failure. Göring's promises to Hitler about the Luftwaffe destroying Britain were not mere boasts. They were strategic assessments that shaped German planning and committed the Reich to a campaign it could not win. When Göring stood before Hitler and declared the Luftwaffe could do what the Army and Navy could not, he was not lying. He believed it. His entire career, his victories in the Great War, his success building the Luftwaffe, the string of victories across Europe, all reinforced his confidence. He had no reason to doubt himself, but confidence based on past success is not the same as clear-eyed assessment of current reality. Göring saw what he wanted to see. He heard what he wanted to hear from his intelligence staff. He made promises that felt true to him in the moment, promises that Hitler desperately wanted to believe. The tragedy, from the German perspective, was that Göring's promises delayed recognition of a fundamental truth. Air power alone could not defeat Britain. An invasion was probably impossible, even with air superiority, given the Royal Navy's strength. The entire strategy of forcing Britain to surrender through bombing was flawed from the beginning. But Göring's confidence, his assurances, his promises to Hitler kept Germany committed to an unwinnable campaign for months. Those months cost thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of trained aircrew, and precious time that could have been used to prepare for the invasion of the Soviet Union. The failure to defeat Britain meant Germany would fight a two-front war, the nightmare scenario German strategy had sought to avoid since Bismarck's time. In the years after the Battle of Britain, Göring's influence waned. His promises had failed. His reputation as Hitler's most reliable commander was shattered. He retreated into morphine addiction and art collecting, playing less and less role in actual military decision-making. Other commanders rose to prominence. The Luftwaffe itself, never recovering from the losses of 1940, would decline throughout the war, eventually unable to defend German airspace against the massive Allied bombing campaigns that would reduce German cities to rubble. The promises Göring had made about air power protecting Germany would be thrown back in his face as American bombers struck in daylight and British bombers struck at night, and the Luftwaffe could do nothing to stop them. At the Nuremberg trials after the war, Göring faced judgment for his crimes, but he also faced questions about his military leadership. Why had the Luftwaffe failed over Britain? Why had he made promises he could not keep? Göring, even in defeat, could not quite admit the truth. He blamed intelligence failures. He blamed the weather. He blamed the limited range of the Messerschmitt 109. He blamed everything except his own judgment. To admit that his promises to Hitler had been based on delusion would be to admit that his entire self-conception as a military genius was false. He could not do it. He went to his death by suicide the night before his scheduled execution, still believing he had been a great commander undone by circumstances beyond his control. But the historical record is clear. Hermann Göring promised Adolf Hitler that the Luftwaffe would destroy Britain. He promised it with absolute confidence, backed by credentials and past victories. He set timelines and made predictions. He staked his reputation on the outcome, and he failed completely. The promises were hollow. The confidence was misplaced. The Luftwaffe could not deliver what Göring assured Hitler it could. And that failure, that broken promise, changed the course of the war and ultimately contributed to Germany's defeat.